So hi everyone, welcome along to the FFS tea break. I have to be really careful to say that in shortened version, Louise, rather than the full one, given that we're all politely or these sorts of things. Otherwise, it can drop out in an entirely different way. So I'm here, Paula Brockwell from the Employee Experience Project, and I've got the Louise Fraser with me, People and Culture Director at Impact, and also awesome podcast host of We Need to Talk About HR. So she's pretty awesome, to be honest, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. She spent the vast majority of her career in organisations supporting in people and culture roles and really doing that bit of reality checking. How do you really make a difference with organisations when they're just trying to get on with doing the day job in and out? So Louise, welcome along. I'm so delighted to have you today. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. It's nice to be introduced rather than being the introducer as usual on the pod. So thank you.
So what is your FFS moment? Share with us today. What's the one for you?
Yeah, I thought a little while about this one, and I think I'm going to go a little bit broader. I hope you don't mind, than something specific. And I think for me, my FFS moment is whenever I hear a leader or anybody say something along the lines of HR or our people team are accountable for this change.
Drop mic.
Yeah. Like it's as simple as that. And I suppose for context, I think that it's so important that within an organization, we understand that HR teams can design change, they can coach change, they can enable change, but they can't own change alone, right? Because if HR become the change department, then everyone else unconsciously steps back, and it's like someone has pressed like this invisible delegate upwards button across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think culture is such an interesting area around that, isn't it? This idea that, that we can own how other people feel or how other people behave. There's no one single owner on that, but there are some very clear influencers. And as HR, I think we can build the capability to help people manage behavior, manage tone, and manage experience, but we can't bridge the gaps of what people experience and what they feel in their teams and in the business day in, day out, really. So it's kind of an impossible thing to ask you to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think every HR leader I know will have received an email that sort of, can you just roll this out, or can you just make this happen? Can you just miraculously make everybody love this change that nobody else in the business has yet role modeled, right? And it's just an interesting one from my perspective, because it's culture's lived experience, right? So particularly if you're talking about changing those types of things, there are so many factors to implementing change.
Yeah, we always talk about in our work with clients like this idea of kind of what's the difference between, we almost break it down from like support services, put HR and comms and things into that world. And I know it's more than that, but I think it's a helpful way to conceptualize it and talk about that idea of enablement, capability building, infrastructure building, but the leaders being the only people who can make things feel real, safe and relevant. And, if your manager isn't telling you that this is something that you need to pay attention to or that you need to be accountable for every day, then you're going to focus on the stuff that they're telling you to pay attention to, aren't you? So it's kind of an impossible task, I would say, to get HR to push above all of that noise and nudge to make something relevant in a way that other people haven't been able to.
Yeah, I like to think about it as HR teams being the architects almost of the change, and then the leadership or those that have influence being the builders of change, because otherwise you end up with unrealistic expectations, stalled progress, and exhausted HR teams, right? That it's just trying to push everybody uphill.
Yeah. How did you get yourself to that place? Because I suppose my observation as someone who looks at this externally is that some people still lean in when they get asked to do this stuff. They try and be the change, or I don't know, maybe people get so knackered from seeing that a gap needs to be filled and it never quite gets filled that they try and bridge it themselves. So how do you think you've always been in a place where you've recognised that difference between roles and responsibilities, or is that a journey that you've had to take through your career?
Absolutely not. I'm an absolute people pleaser early in my career, and thought that I could influence change across total organization just by putting together a bit of a framework and saying the same thing over and over again. So it's definitely been a learned experience that everybody needs to lean in, right? I think changes in those micro moments, everyday decisions, like conversations that are had in business. And I've certainly learned from failures of looking back on a change program that was, we'll definitely be able to shift this change in 3 months, and not actually having made much progress at the end of it, and reflecting on why, and realizing that half of the people in the organization don't actually know that the change program is happening for a start. So yeah.
So how do you get yourself there, do you think? If you're, well, I suppose there's a bigger question. Do you think that was a you thing, or do you think that's a profession thing? Because it's probably a loaded question, because I think we teach HR professionals as they come into the profession that we've got to be the change that we seek, rather than that we need to get that through other people. I think it's something we almost need to unteach ourselves as we get more senior, or we dance with burnout a bit. We've got to learn how to create those boundaries and that protection to maximize impact. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, broadly speaking, we as a HR wide, I guess, collective, we probably are too quick to say yes, are too quick to take on that change. And also, my experience is that leadership and exec teams are also really quick to push that change and transformation onto the HR teams, and pass the baton, because it all feels quite difficult, doesn't it, to make change. So obviously there are exceptions. There are some people ops leaders that I meet and speak with on the podcast that are getting it right, but I would say it's something that is often initially really difficult to do, especially if you're in your first HR leadership role. You're trying to impress the exec team. You've done all of your studies on change management. You probably think you can do it all yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Danny in the chat's just kind of saying that I think some people have that natural propensity to naturally lean in more than others, and you don't notice the expense on yourself, do you, until you've been round the merry-go-round. And I do think that HR attracts those of us who want to make a difference, who want to make work better. So there's often that natural instinct to lean in on things. But as you say, like, the organizational system is primed a lot of the times, isn't it? Even great ops leaders are really busy doing the day job. And if they can get someone else to make that thing happen, then why wouldn't they try and get someone else to make that thing happen? So we've got to be quite strong on that contracting and understanding of where our roles and values are. And even, I think, I don't know about you, but there was certainly a point in my career where I got to the point where I realized that leaning in as much as I did was probably sometimes doing more harm than good for the progress of the project or the work, because I was bridging a gap that, if it's there, it's more likely to create space for other people to fill. So there's different things, I guess, that we've got to be aware of individually to make sure we create the space to let things succeed, I think, or lean in the right places to help momentum build.
Yeah, I think you touched on something there about leaning in the right places, and often there'll be a change that needs to happen, or a change that is put upon a people team or a HR team without really clear understanding of how that links back to what the business is trying to achieve as well. And I think actually, if we're really clear on how any cultural change that we're trying to map feeds back into the broader strategic objectives of the business, then that's when we become a little bit more capable of saying, okay, well, we're all in on this, and how are we as an organization going to focus on organizational output rather than HR-led change.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that kind of breadth of perspective and alignment to what the business does allows us then to make anything that feels like an HR agenda into that broader business agenda and help connect people people to it. So I feel like we're getting into some of the ways that you can move people through this moment. So talk to me a bit about that. So I hear that piece around broadening this from a HR goal or a change goal into an organizational goal or a performance goal. What else do you think is important if you want to help to set that contract or those roles in an appropriate way?
Yeah, I think, as I said, those clear strategic drivers that lean back into the broader organizational goals are really important, because you have to be able to tell a story of change, right? People need to understand the narrative behind the why you're doing it, and that why needs to like build upwards towards the business's trajectory. And then this is quite traditional, and we hear it so frequently, I hope anyway, but leadership capability, right? You can't drive change without leadership capability, without manager enablement, without them understanding what their role is in the change program. Because I think I said it earlier, but leaders are the ones that are having the day-to-day conversations with their team, that they're reinforcing the changes that you want to make, recognizing the work that's being done in relation to the change, etc. So that's important. I think it's really important that everyone knows their role in any change program. So there has to be a level of accountability structure, who's in charge of what, clearly defining who's accountable for what piece of change. HR sets the direction. Leaders, in some senses, own that delivery and the communication of change. And then teams are aware of what their responsibilities are, so they can give feedback, experiment, iterate, those types of things as well. So who does what is super important at a very like baseline level of cultural change.
That makes total sense. What about that kind of reset and expectation? So I suppose there's a bit of me that kind of thinks about the challenge. We were talking, weren't we, before we came live today, about that difference between being an external consultant versus being in-house, and me kind of talking about that freedom that I know that I have to come in and say whatever needs to be said, what my brain thinks needs to be said, maybe. But you know how different I think it can be when you're in house, because there's a different tone to relationships. There's a different set of Emperor's New Clothes experience or not on it, and whether you've got a day rate attached to someone talking to you or not. How do you kind of create the foundations, I guess, to be able to build those differences in roles and responsibilities if perhaps you're trapped in a situation where the system just expects you to do it? How do you reset that from your perspective as somebody who's got experience of doing this internally rather than coming in and blowing it up?
Funny. Yeah, I was it's so interesting, because if someone comes in externally, it is often more, it can be seen as more impactful, right, in terms of, here's this person with expertise in X, and they're going to tell us how to do things now, and so we believe it to be true. But I think foundationally, when you're trying to create change, well, there needs to be a narrative around why the change needs to happen and what you think should happen on the other side of that change. So that at the very foundation of like creating the roadmap, there needs to be a journey that you take people on. And then I think it's hard to say, right, because we're in a world where things seem to be consistently changing. There has to be almost a bit of a reset session with those in the organization that are impacted by the change, right? And if your role or your responsibility or what you're accountable for is actually shifting, then you need to be consulted with on that change and brought on that journey. I think the worst thing that can happen is when change happens top down and all of a sudden everybody has to act or work or operate in a different way than what they were operating in last week, because leadership have decided it, because they've had a conversation about the future of the business and no one understands any of that stuff that's happened, in the lead up to those conversations.
Yeah, I think that conscious recontracting is massive, isn't it? And it's missed so much. I think as much it's as important as you talk about the flow through change, but I think we miss the point that we can use that as well with our senior teams. Like sometimes I think we feel like we need to defend or push back, but whenever we've got the goal of the change, the strategic drivers that you were talking about earlier at the heart of something, I think it gives us a lot of permission to say, look, if we do it like this, this is what we're going to get. But if we do it like this, with everybody involved and playing this role, then we're much more likely to get this outcome. So that outcome focused conversation where we're being really honest about what those ideal outcomes mean in terms of demands for the different groups, massive, isn't it? And often I think a lot less scary once you get into it than it feels like it's going to be, because it's not really about relationships, it's about attainment of the goals, which people often orientate towards a bit more easily, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're bringing everyone on that journey of change and you're having those reset moments and you're talking about the importance of those particular change drivers, there's then an opportunity to almost bring them on the journey of, and you're a big part of this, right? So we're going to run peer learning pods where you can share what's working, what isn't amongst your peer groups, or we're going to do some drop-in coaching surgeries on how you can, enable your teams better to react to this change. So there's lots of things that can happen when you break it down a little bit further into the business.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm mindful that I'm just going to nick loads of your time today because I could talk about this forever. But before I let you escape back to the rest of your day, what's the one big thing that you think people should take away from the conversation today? Or what's the one biggest thing that has been helpful for you in terms of your journey of really getting to that point of partnership with the business rather than feeling like you've got to try and do everything?
Yeah, I think if you feel yourself slipping into this kind of moment where you hear that sort of classic, hey, HR needs to drive this, or here's this change program that you need to roll out, don't ask who's driving this. I would probably step back and say, what's my role in making this happen? And how can I link it back to as many touch points in the business and draw it into a bigger narrative as possible? So just remember that we're there to guide and equip, not carry the change.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, guide and equip for sure. And yeah, I think the big takeaway for me on this is never go away and do the project plan yourself. Put a cross-functional project team together, and it's a really nice kind of way to share ownership and input in from a really pragmatic way. So I think, as you say, don't do that piece around thinking I've just got to figure this out. Put some steps and mechanisms and structures in place that allow you to drive that shared ownership from the start, and that'll force a really different conversation from the minute you get moving on things. Cool. Yeah. Lovely. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you. As we mentioned, Louise is the co-host of an awesome podcast, so we're gonna we'll pop the link and things for that into the live link, etc., so that you've got that if you want. But check her out; she's amazing, very good interviewer. I can say that from personal experience. So check out the podcast. But thank you so much for your time. It's lovely to see you.
Thanks, Paula. Appreciate it.
Thanks, lovely.